Welcome back to the Driveline Baseball R&D podcast. I'm Jack Lambert here with Josh Heshka and Marek Ramilo. We're going to be talking Arsenal models this week after covering the more traditional stuff, pitching, location models in the previous episode. So definitely would watch that as a precursor to some of the more advanced models here. Before we do that, Heshka, as you likely know if you're watching this podcast, pitches in the Phillies system, had his spring training debut, Major League spring training, that is. So we got some data and video on him. Heshka, you kind of want to walk us through how that went?
Yeah, I don't really remember it. I kind of blacked out. But I did make my MLB spring training debut. I came in the seventh inning, I believe it was. Came in, one batter, got him out, count it. Wasn't my sharpest stuff execution wise, as Lambert's probably about to share in terms of our location model, but yeah, got the guy. I for those who follow me on Twitter, you probably saw my heart rate data from the game, and it got up to a whopping 182 max heart rate, which is probably not ideal. It's not like the Patrick Mahomes like coming in game winning drive and his like heart rate's like lower than it was on the sidelines. But you know what? Hey, it's I'll count it. But yeah, give me the dirt, Lambo. I'm curious what the models say.
Yeah, do you want the good or the bad first?
Let's get the bad out of the way.
All right, so extremely small sample, location grade on a 2080 scale for the slider was 0.1, so worse than 20 with two thrown. Location on the cutter was negative 1.94 on the 2080 scale.
Great.
So a lot of room to grow there. Sinker was good, 50 grade locations there.
Okay.
The good, well, no, we'll stick with the bad. Your stuff, the cutter had you at 20 grade with two thrown.
But okay, yeah, that's just the stuff model though. That's not the Arsenal model. Okay,
correct. Yeah, we're not accounting for the buyback
mix and match
from that cutter. Yeah. Which probably makes the 80 grade slider pretty good.
Okay.
That if you've never seen Heshka's slider, let's see here, 11 inches horizontal, 16 and a half IVB. So he's throwing a left-handed fastball profile from
like what, 3 feet off the ground or so, I think it was.
Yeah, exactly. So 16 and a half IVB, that's got to be like only rivaled by Tyler Rogers. That's insane. So there was a little bit of discourse on Twitter on the people stumbling upon your movement plot. I don't know if you saw that.
And yeah, all your fellow Reds fans were.
Yeah, exactly. Reds in 4. I don't even think he knows who you are. He didn't tag you or anything. He just said, Josh Heshka, what the hell am I looking at? Yeah.
Can I ask you about your heart rate real quick?
Yeah, hit me.
I always figured, and this is like the whatever classic tale, that your heart rate would come crashing in after you get the first one out of the way, but it spiked after your first pitch, didn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think coming once the manager came out, I think I was sitting in the bullpen and I was chilling around like a 140, which I don't know what zone that is.
Chilling around a 140. That's a statement in itself.
I don't know if that's zone 3 or whatever, right? But then it's and then as soon as I get the call and I'm jogging out there, like I have no recollection of that jog, and then first pitch was it got up to like a 175 or something like that. So I think it was just obviously the emotions of the game, and just want to make a good first impression. So it was probably not ideal, but we can keep an eye on it.
Was so of all the outings you've made, do you know, like, has your heart rate ever gotten up that high? Have you worn Whoop like your whole career?
I don't know. I haven't like looked that closely into it just because I've never felt my heart pounding out of my chest as much as it was. Well, I'll definitely keep an eye on it this season and see if that's like common for me. It feels like it's probably not that high. It can't be. That's pretty ridiculous.
Oh yeah,
that's like higher than my theoretical max based on my age, I think.
Yeah.
If you do like what is it, 220 minus your age times 0.9 or something like that.
You just got that off the dome?
That could be completely wrong, but I think it's there's some like formula for like what your theoretical max is for your heart rate.
Well, it's a good thing you're not a starter, not sustaining that 180 for 2 hours.
That's true, and clearly the heart rate didn't help the velo at all. So it's okay.
Not
We
too.
don't have to.
Where have you been most of spring training?
What did I
You don't
average?
have to divulge
85.
if you. Okay.
I think spring training I've been averaging like I think the live before this I was averaging like 86.5. So a little down, a little down.
Okay.
It's okay. It's okay.
Good stuff. Yeah.
We'll be back.
Keep an eye out for Philly's spring training. Just may catch a Josh
On
Heshka appearance.
ESPN too. Actually, that's another
Yeah.
important point. Yeah.
Just came in the dugout. Buster only was there. Saw Ken Rosenthal before the game. That was great.
Yeah. They I believe they announced you as Josh Heshka, so may want to correct.
Carl Ravitch needs to
whoever's
figure it
calling
out, man.
Yeah,
He needs to figure that shit out.
Yeah, good stuff. Heshka, you kind of want to introduce us into the topic for today?
So I think this has been a traditional shortcoming of a lot of the traditional models. Traditional. It's been a shortcoming of the traditional models, which is that, as I kind of alluded to, all these pitches are graded in isolation. And so year and a half ago, leading into Sabre seminar, we initially sparked by the curiosity of trying to optimize usage percentages, kind of embarked on this project of building arsenal models, as we call them, to kind of bridge the gap of understanding and understanding why why and how different pitches play together in the arsenal. So Marek and Jack presented at Sabre seminar last year. What date was that? Was that 2024?
Yeah,
August 2024. Yeah, so I think I kind of alluded to it, but Lambo, do you kind of want to introduce what exact problem we were trying to solve, and kind of how we started thinking about how to implement these arsenal models, and some of the insights maybe that we came up with along the way?
Yeah, I think it's a super interesting topic because arsenal effects are, like, qualitatively watching baseball, maybe the easiest thing to pick up on for like someone who is not super familiar with the game. Like even when you're 13 and throwing your first breaking ball, you're gauging when to use it off of hitters' expectations. Like if you throw a breaking ball and they were way early on it, they're clearly looking for your fastball. Like we're getting these takeaways naturally just watching the game. But despite that, this is like maybe the most under researched area in like pitch modeling. Probably, I just can't think of anything different.
Not anymore. Everybody's getting a piece of it.
But so we wanted to take this on, and it's a very difficult thing to do because traditional models, they isolate pitches and analyze them in a vacuum, like a stuff model, just looking at the specific ball movement metrics that kind of translate how that translates to pitch value. And arsenal effects want to do the opposite and basically say, based on everything else that could have happened, what did happen? So that was poorly phrased. But what I mean there is if Josh throws a sinker, four seam, cutter, slider, and he throws a slider that gets a chase off the plate, likely a lot of the value of that came from the stuff, the location of the pitch. But there is, without a doubt, some effect to the batter's expectation potentially being they were going to get a cutter or a four seam or a sinker. So we wanted to take into account that factor, what would happen if the other pitches were thrown. And yeah, it's not easy to do. Marek, do you want to kind of dive into the beginning of how we started doing that? What your initial work was?
Yeah. I think we're expanding on a few things that are all rooted in the things that you just detailed. The first was, as you said, like this known effect that makes pitches better in the context of the other pitches in the arsenal. We alluded to this in a previous episode and in a lot of videos and tweets and such, but a similar effect exists in chess, where you take certain combinations of pieces that take on a different numerical value than the straight sum of their component numerical values because of the sort of positions you can achieve with these pieces in tandem than their individual value would imply. Don't need to get into that concept too much because again we've spoken about it before. The shtick that we kind of had in our Sabre seminar presentation was calling it a PB&J effect, where in isolation, peanut butter and jelly, both 30 grade condiments, let's say, but you put them together and you get something in the 75 grade caliber.
Justice for peanut butter, man. That's at least a 50 grade,
yeah.
50 grade isolated food there.
This is the case for that, certainly. But the application of this in a pitch modeling context was already kind of implicit in some of our stuff models, or in the industry stuff model conventions, in the way that changeup or generally off-speed stuff grades were directly a function of velo differentials. And that captured very well the need to throw a slower changeup than your fastball, but also being able to achieve good changeup stuff at different velo bands, because the absolute velo didn't matter. What mattered was the difference between your changeup and your primary fastball. And that launched some of this research investigation because, one, we believed that expanding that effect to not look only at velo differentials, but also movement differentials, and to also break free from the need to assign a single reference pitch as the source of gains. I was going to say stuff gains, but since we brought this out into a completely different metric, we wanted to take velo break differentials across all the pitches in your repertoire and reward pitchers with a metric that was separate from their pure stuff, to encapsulate a lot of these effects that people have observed in basically throughout baseball history.
And so I know for those who might be following along with Lambo or Marek or Driveline on social media, you may have come across these new metrics that Marek's alluding to, called mix and match is what we called them, kind of this peanut butter and jelly effect. Lambert, do you want to explain exactly what mix and match are and how they kind of play off each other and are based on the broader arsenal that we're trying to quantify here?
Yeah. So all of these effects, we tried to boil into one single metric, but ended up deciding that they actually fit better as separate metrics. So these are mix and match. Match is kind of your traditional, what people would call tunneling, taking it a little bit of a step further though. So match plus is very high for pitchers who do a good job of throwing pitches off of each other that are following similar trajectories, but ultimately end up in different places. So guys that typically dominate this are fastball changeup guys like Frankie Montas. Kyle Hendricks is probably the best example of severely bad stuff. Like there are plenty of guys who throw 88 across America that are not pitching in MLB. But that fastball changeup combo is so lethal that with batter expectations, he's able to generate swings on stuff off the plate, weak contact on guys not getting their best swing off. Another sort of way that match applies this is pairs that play off each other in similar directions but expand. So the example here would be like cutter slider. Emmanuel Clase is very heavy on the cutter, and when he's not throwing that, he's throwing the slider. And our theory and what we've proved is that there is value in the fact that a slider from Emmanuel Clase is going to play up if the batter is expecting a cutter. They're going to generate more swings on it and more weak contact there. Mix is the opposite of this. So mix is the total differential in 3D space. So if you look at like a movement plot, you can see how much of it a guy covers. Like Darvish covers as much as anyone. Seth Lugo, they cover that entire space. Mix takes this a step further and takes this 2D movement plot and also adds in the temporal aspect of velocity difference for every pitch. So you can kind of imagine this blob of when the fastball or when the fastest pitch reaches the plate, where is everything else in space? That curveball may be 8 feet behind it. So the pitches that do well here are like Clayton Kershaw's curveball, for example, playing off a fastball at like 91, a curveball in the low 70s that is super loopy. That is just something totally different from anything else in his arsenal. So we give him credit for that in our mixed grades, which are able to generally higher chance of take. So behind in counts, if you can flip a curveball in there or something drastically different. Another example of this guy would be Cy Young winner Chris Sale, mostly just sinker slider, completely opposite directions. You better guess one's coming. And if you guess wrong, there's a good chance you look stupid chasing something a foot off the plate. So yeah, that at the highest level is the overview of mix and match.
And I think some of the like initial observations that we were basing this project off of were things that we noticed that really good pitching coaches, really good pitching minds have known intuitively for a long amount of time. So the initial example that I think both Marek and Lambo alluded to at one point were, you have a sinker slider guy. One gets 20 inches the sinker gets 20 inches of horizontal arm side. The slider gets 20 inches of horizontal glove side. In theory, a batter can just, identify the initial tunnel of the pitch and say, I know that only one of these pitches could possibly be a strike. So
Yeah.
I can just sit that pitch once I see it, once I identify the initial tunnel. So something that pitching coaches have started doing in the last few years was like saying, hey, guys that do that, like throw a cutter as your quote unquote bridge pitch, which is, I know, something that Marek has a lot of insights on as well, the bridge pitch idea. And that's something that, in theory, now if you see an initial tunnel, like this kind of the intuition behind some of these the match model, for example. Now, if you identify an initial tunnel, now for any tunnel, there's probably at least two pitches that could be a strike or like at least be competitive pitches based on those initial tunnels. So you're not ever able to eliminate to a single pitch. And I think so that's one example. Obviously, the fastball changeup example, like the changeup is just a slow fastball in terms of shape. So trying to figure out and dig into like why changeups are successful in the first place. And then something Bodie has talked about quite often over the last few years, which is having a fourth or fifth pitch, even if it's really low stuff, having like a really loopy curveball that you can just throw in there for a strike. You can get a lot of success doing that just because one, either the batter is sitting your fourth or fifth best pitch. And in which case, yeah, they might hit it. But like if they're constantly sitting your fourth or fifth best pitch, like you're going to be way more successful than not over time. And if they're not sitting your fourth or fifth best pitch, you can easily steal a strike, and basically it's free run value if you can land that pitch. So we kind of went into this like saying like we noticed that all these effects probably exist. We noticed that really smart baseball minds have recognized these effects. What's the underlying mechanism for why they're so successful? Marek, do you want to touch on that a little bit more?
I think the term that we need to say explicitly here that drives all of this is the notion of entropy, which when we kind of tapped into that methodology calculating match from the perspective of batter expectations given trajectory characteristics, translating those into probabilities of the pitch that they're seeing at the point of decision. How do we maximize uncertainty for the batter, and what pitches do that very well? That is the basis of match, is maximizing entropy, really. And in the Match Plus model, we're specifically maximizing trajectory-based or in-flight entropy, where a maximum amount of trajectory overlap two pitches that live in the same tunnel until a certain point are the ones that are going to grade out really well on match. An interesting thing to consider, though, as we go forward, and this is something I know Max Bay talked about on Finding the Edge, another baseball research podcast, was establishing what exactly the prior is for the batter that informs their expectation of the pitch that they're facing, is a key part of this investigation for anybody that wants to take this research further. And said more simply, we know we're trying to disrupt the batter's timing, and we know you can achieve that with good arsenal effects. Now, is the way to disrupt that purely by throwing two similar looking pitches to the same hitter in the same at bat? Or is this something you can achieve over a longer time sample in MLB over the course of a series or a season in a given batter pitcher matchup, a career even? Then you could take things a step further and say, well, maybe as a pitcher, I don't even need to throw this to this guy. They just have to know I can achieve this. Like they've seen the scouting reports, they see the breakdowns of what is in my arsenal. Like just having that lodged in the guy's head is enough to get these arsenal effects out of a given pitch that mixes or matches well with another offering. I think it's a really interesting idea because if we're able to build these arsenals intelligently, but never actually show the hitter, never have to output that information by throwing the pitch, but still be able to get them off balance with a wide arsenal because they know what I can achieve. I think that unlocks a lot of cool things.
I think this year too was especially interesting. It could just be my bias from thinking about arsenals a ton leading up to our presentation and implementing these at Driveline. But it felt like the playoffs, the idea of familiarity was way more top of mind than it has been in previous years. We saw the extension of the 3 times through the order discussion applied to relievers more than I ever have before. Talking about, did Dave Roberts even say he was being careful about who he threw out in specific series? I could be making that up, but from their usage of the bullpen, it was the Dodgers' usage of their bullpen, very clear that it was not. It was something they were considering, that this 3 times through the order thing may not be limited to a specific game. It's how many times has a batter within a reasonable time frame seen a certain pitcher throw a certain pitch. And it's just we really have struggled to identify historically how batter anticipation of what is coming translates to output on the field, but it's inevitably super important. And Marek, do you want to talk about the specific way we modeled it for mix and match, the prior expectation?
Yeah, and well, actually, before I do, I want to note that I almost jokingly suggested we called this podcast the pitching universal theory of everything, only because everybody has always talked about the time through the order effect and arsenal metrics, and your ability to use stuff until the batter can sit on something. And I think arsenal quality is the thing that binds all these things together, because if you have a guy that has really, really bad stuff but can survive multiple times through the order as a starter, it's almost always a function of his ability to build a wider arsenal around his lower quality stuff. And your ability to we use the term buyback and decay, your ability to navigate that is often the thing that determines, in addition to just pure arm talent and ability to fight off actual fatigue, the way you navigate this, or the way you could find conversion prospects from relievers to starters, is probably through arsenal effects and through your ability to overcome this long-term familiarity effect that Jack alluded to. So we have a wide set of problems that could be solved by getting this right. And as you mentioned, we have a first pass at it. So mechanically, what we did to model out mix and match, and we recognized that there were 2 components to arsenal quality here, because of how people were trying to discuss this topic, not qualitatively, but conceptually, without having real numerical answers to this, which was by analyzing movement plots and looking at the blobs of movement for all of a guy's offerings, and either identifying, how much space the movement plot covered, and then additionally how interconnected each of those blobs were. And rather than trying to find some method of describing those things using graph theory or something, to actually interact with how the movement plot looked, we took things into trajectory space, such that we could not simulate, but generate sufficient sample trajectories of each of a guy's pitches using the 9-parameter fit to indicate at each snapshot between release and the point of decision, or the point at which each pitch crosses the plate, which is after the decision point, where each trajectory was in relation to each other. And again, from there, applied an entropy calculation to create the match number to say, for each pitch pair, what is the probability that the batter induces that he's looking at the right pitch. And then on the mix side, we looked at a terminal point in the trajectory, which I believe was the moment at which the fastest pitch crossed the plate or got to the decision point, one of those.
That's I think it was the plate, yeah.
Crosses the plate, and then measure the Euclidean distance covered by the pitch pair, and that is just looking in XYZ space and seeing how far apart the pitches were. The idea being, if you guessed wrong, assuming that you were seeing the faster pitch, kind of how far off would you be as a batter swinging in XYZ space. So without getting too much further into the weeds, that's how we landed on a V1 for mix and match to get both aspects.
And I think it's important to recognize that with match especially, just having really high entropy at the decision point isn't enough, right? So for example, two sinkers have two randomly chosen sinkers have very, very high entropy at the decision point, but they also have very high entropy at home plate, meaning that they end up following very similar trajectories and getting to the same location. So what we actually want is very high entropy at the decision point, and then actually very low entropy at home plate, and a substantial difference between the two distributions, because that's how you really get that's basically how you play with the batter's expectations and get true meaningful difference in two different pitch types. Yeah, if it's really high entropy at home plate and really high entropy at the decision point, that just means they're pitches that are very, very similar shape-wise, which isn't actually adding that much value in terms of fooling the batter.
I think what's important about that is I know we got feedback, and Lance Brzezowski asked this question after seeing a presentation, was, okay, these are kind of opposing ideas, and Jack, you granted as much when we first began this episode, that, mix and match are measuring two different types of arsenal quality here. He was wondering, is it possible in any way to achieve both? Can you have good mix and good match if one is rewarding tightness of overlapping shapes and the other is rewarding a huge breadth of shapes? I think, Heshka, you just explained that, if you have a certain entropy trajectory at one point in your in flight, and then a different level of entropy at the other point, then you can achieve that. But I don't know if either of you have any more precise answers.
It's tough based on, just real quick, sorry, Lambo. I don't think we've looked at this specifically yet, but I think because of our assumption that acceleration is constant, which is like the universal assumption kind of in baseball analytic space right now, at least with like the 9-parameter fit, there's some constraint in terms of like pitches that have a high enough entropy at the decision point. There's some constraint as to how far those pitches can physically get away from each other by the time they reach home plate. So I do think there's some like physical constraint there. We haven't looked fully into that, but I think that definitely constrains some of what we're talking about. It's not possible to have really high entropy at the decision point and then like some massive amount of quote unquote late movement that really differentiates shapes.
Yeah. And kind of building off that and Marek's point, you can get good mix and match on specific pitch pairs. But the guys that, what I think is more interesting is the guys that are able to create mix and match within their arsenal with separate pitch pairs. So like the best example, that's a difficult thing to do. That most guys are match guys or mix guys or like standard arsenal guys. I still remember the first time we ran this and ran the validation and saw Paul Skeens at the top, that was pretty validating, that he's got 102 mile an hour four seam, throws a splinker 95, a curveball, and then also a slider. It's like, all right, yeah, if that guy's leading our Arsenal leaderboard, we're doing all right.
And he
So
tossed in a cutter and a sinker this spring, I believe, to juice up the
yeah,
fastball.
exactly. So now there's going to be the cutter, and then the slider is going to play off better than that, and then the sinker with the splinker is going to be ridiculous. Like it's just wild. Somehow he's leading another leaderboard as if the stuff wasn't good enough. Um, so those type of guys, Max Fried was he might have been the number one on the leaderboard. I think Schemes was two. Um, yeah, those guys are very highly ranked in both from that perspective.
So something I want to get one of your guys' thoughts on, or both, kind of this trade-off. So, kind of alluding to what was mentioning earlier about adding a pitch, right? So, let's say I have really high stuff sinker slider, and I want to add a cutter, maybe that's not as high stuff. Or for example, I have really high four seam slider change up, and I want to add a big loopy curveball. How do we go about, or like, what are the next steps for basically quantifying the trade off of, okay, maybe adding this pitch is really low stuff plus, but because of the run value that it gains me from my arsenal effects, that allows me to actually throw this pitch and be successful. Like, what goes into that decision to add that pitch, determine that trade off? Is this pitch actually worth it, or maybe the arsenal effects are good, but maybe the stuff is so low that it's actually not beneficial to add into my arsenal?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question and practical to most guys. We talked about on a prior episode, like the pillars of pitching. Every pitch you throw should uh, either get you a called strike, get you a whiff, or get you weak contact. If you view everything through those three pillars, so maybe you have your knockout stuff pitch that you can get guys on an 0-2 count. Maybe you can't get to an 0-2 count. So regardless of that stuff, we need a pitch that we can land for a strike or use early in at bats to get out of a jam, get a ground ball double play. So knowing what the specific need we're filling with a pitch is very valuable. And then once you've done that, you can take a look at, let's say, your example of sinker sweeper, and I just need to get to a 2-strike count because my sweeper is knockout, whatever. I need something there. We'd probably propose a cutter because that would work. Likely, you'll be able to command it pretty well. Generally, gyro pitches can be commanded pretty well. And then also, our models would say it's going to make your sweeper better. If you've established a cutter earlier in the count, that sweeper is going to play stronger off the plate because it's the batter's already primed to be thinking of that cutter. I think an interesting use case too that we saw last year a little bit is sweeper usage against opposite hand. I was noticing that at least anecdotally, looked to be something that was happening more often. If you can jam a guy with a cutter in early in a count and then just totally try and bury a sweeper in like on his back hip, it's much more likely to get a chase in there than if you just threw the sweeper in a vacuum and they had never seen a cutter or anything else moving towards them before in that at bat. I don't know if you have any thoughts to add on that, Marek.
Yeah, I thought that was well said. One avenue that we're taking this down is on the usage front as well, which sort of indirectly increases the total run value of a pitcher in this way, we think, by freeing up bullets for your stuff pitches if you have complementary arsenal building pitches to go up with it. So this notion of a decay and a buyback effect has sort of made its way into the conversation in a lot of ways, but we're claiming that by having pitches that look like or play off your stuff pitches well, your run value minimizing pitches very well, you are able to buy back usage of those by throwing a cutter with your really, really good sweeper. So the thought process is we know that a guy can lean very heavily into his best pitches. If he has his uh, high stuff pitches, something must be preventing him from throwing those pitches every single time. Um, that we think can be chalked up entirely to the familiarity effect. And provided we can model out how a certain pitch decays, we would be able to understand that past a certain point, um, the expectation of your best pitch every single time is no longer viable. So um, maybe there's a way to reverse some of that decay, and maybe we can achieve that by throwing pitches that look like your best pitch to, in effect, trick the batter into uh, thinking that they've seen your A1 and A2 offerings, but it was really just this bridge cutter, this bridge sinker or something. No,
Yeah,
go for
I
it.
was just going to build off that. If you think about, go reel down the analyst rabbit hole here. If you think about pitching as trying to traverse this RE288 grid, so the expected runs given the count, outs, and runners on base. I start an inning with no balls, no strikes, no one on base, no outs. I need to get to 3 outs. Um, if we can model batter effects, then our optimization problem is no longer what gets me the immediate next spot on that grid, which likely it'd be first pitch ground out or like 0-1, something there. You can model how using a specific pitch type will impact you in the future. This buyback thing that we're talking about. How much is this pitch going to decay? Will throwing this pitch gain me value for the next 2 batters I'm going to face, or next 2 times I face the same guy? You're expanding the whole kind of problem in traversing this grid to be way more informative of the overall context of everything going on rather than the literal state you find yourself in.
Yeah, I think that's it's basically what we currently do is like more analogous to like greedy search, right? Where we just take like the best current option. But we could definitely there's definitely some level of like some A star algorithm out there that like we can use with like further context. I love exactly what you just said there, Lambert. And I think the quintessential example of this is like the Paul Skeens versus Otani
Yes,
last
exactly.
year, where Skeens blows 3 fastballs by Otani in the first at bat, right? Just like boom, boom, boom. The second at bat, maybe he throws a couple more fastballs, and I think it's the sixth or seventh fastball he ends up throwing Otani. Otani like demolishes it for a home run. And so this idea that batter familiarity and kind of more broadly speaking here, like what the batter's expecting. And I know both of you have alluded to this, like the batter's prior expectation, is some function of a bunch of different factors. One is like pitches that batter has seen from you that day, right? Or even that at bat, right? That's probably the strongest effect. But then there's, the pitches that batter has seen from you in the past, pitcher that batter has seen from pitchers like you, uh, and then just like general league effects. Like there's all these different effects that kind of compile with different weights into like what the batter's expecting. And so being able to try to quantify those as best we can. And obviously there's going to be things that we can never quantify, like which scouting report the batter read or like what the hitting coach told him when he was on deck. Right. So it's like, we're never going to be able to fully understand the entire picture, but I think we can get a little bit closer than we do now at understanding like, and it's like the example you said, Lambo, if you have a wipeout slider and it's a really high stuff pitch, well, why don't you just throw it 3 straight times and try to get 3 strikes? It's because as the batter becomes more familiar with that pitch, they're less likely, or you're less likely to have success with that pitch. It's more likely to underperform its expected run value. I think another underrated aspect of this is kind of the raise pitch arm angle clock from a few
The
years
arm
ago.
clock, yeah.
And I know I have a very vested interest in this being a reality, but I do think there's something to be said. And I forgot who I was just talking about this with. But for example, if let's say it's a postseason series, right, and you have a reliever come in and face maybe Otani, same example, right, And then the next reliever you bring in is a very similar arm slot and very similar arsenal to the pitcher that had just faced him. Ohtani's basically getting some of that familiarity effect without ever having faced that specific batter. So being able to really, so for example, changing the arm slot of the pitcher or even the arm handedness, kind of to what Marek was alluding to, gives it basically buys back value, not just from that pitcher's best pitches, but then it almost buys back, using a different pitcher, buys back value for your best pitcher, uh, basically by resetting the batter's expectation to a different arm angle, to a different arsenal, to different, going from a sinker guy to a four seam guy. But these effects are at play like way more than people realize. And I think a lot of really, really smart teams have started figuring this out. And you can see that through some of the ways they utilize their bullpens.
So what I'm hearing is every time Ranger Suarez pitches, you should be his opener.
Yeah, I think that's the conclusion, right? So we should we gotta talk to someone about
Get
that.
someone on that. I think what you said about the teams recognizing this, we've seen. I think the Dodgers are a great example of this. Grab Lance Lynn in the middle of the season, and suddenly for 10 starts, he's like the best pitcher in the world. It just seems like that was our theory originally when we were making these models. Like they have to have something like this that they get these guys, they change their usage, and they're super effective. So just thinking in terms of not the what's best for me this pitch, but what is best for me at the broader scale. What will change the way the batter approaches me in a way that I can leverage to make my pitches play above what the vacuum-like models say they should. Marek, I know you had some Arsenal-related thoughts with how kind of the Braves go about their pitcher development.
It was, kind of, I don't want to say the reverse of what you just described, but there have been some observations this spring where a few guys, and this is true across all of MLB, this is the year of the mix, as some people are saying, are coming into camp with new additions to their arsenal. And that was true of two particular Braves. It was A.J. Smith-Shawver added a cutter, I believe, and Hurst Waldrop added a curveball. And it was interesting that Waldrop made a point to say that he had thrown a curveball before, and that was, now was the time to bring it back as a, complimentary offering too. He has a four-seamer and a splitter as two feature pitches. I don't know if explicitly getting something with a profile that plays off the splitter was the objective, but what caught my eye was that, okay, he has achieved this pitch, this shape before, and now he's adding it back in. And like, what is the thought process here, and like, how is this a commentary on the player development philosophy? Because it had also been pointed out, and I'll credit Lance again, who made a point that the Braves were among the lowest ranked teams just by the average number of pitch types thrown by starters in the minor leagues. Something like 3 pitches for minor league starters in the organization. That was like 28th or something in baseball. And I had also heard from the Baseball America guys who were doing an organizational prospect preview, saying that the Braves seem to like actively shrink arsenals for their prospect as they make their way through the system. And I was just trying to juxtapose that with, okay, that is clearly an intentional part of their pitcher development process in the minors. But then you fast forward to when they're in the big leagues and trying to stick, having to add offerings back into their arsenal. And so philosophically, is this an attempt to fast track guys, get them throwing their very best stuff as much as possible, establishing those, and then we'll worry about complementary pieces when you're a big leaguer? One, the effectiveness of that is up for discussion. Two, the ability to rely on a guy to add a pitch at that point in his career. I would certainly be interested in your thoughts on that, Heshka. Just having to come in every offseason with a new offering, is that easier to achieve later on in your career? And is this efficient? Is this a practical way to think about it? Because getting by with as small an arsenal as possible is certainly an advantage in some ways, but not if you're eventually going to have to build it out anyway.
Yeah, I think there's like these interesting concepts of like kind of leaning on what we do on the training side, which is like this idea of training economy. And I think there might be something to it where you simplify and you basically try to like maximize the stuff of one or two pitches, stuff and execution of one or two pitches. And it's, at least from my perspective, it's much easier to add a pitch once you've, like, so even with our Arsenal metrics that we're talking about, it's not completely orthogonal to stuff. So
Mhm.
really high stuff, it's easier to have better match based on like throwing harder, for example. Like, it allows you to do way more things in terms of velo differentials, and so having better stuff allows you to also have better arsenals. So I think there might be something there in the sense that, like, being able to maximize your stuff and execution of one or two pitches, simplify, and like being able to add an additional pitch on top of that later on, once you've basically established that baseline, might be more efficient than, say, trying to just have a guy throw four pitches right away, but then never establishing a really high stuff pitch that he can execute often. On the other hand, someone like me who, um, not necessarily hard, but decent stuff in terms of, I guess, according to our models, right, Lambo? Um, but it's yeah, not very electric stuff, but like someone who can like execute pretty well and has always been successful with command. I found it much easier to add two additional pitches last year. So last year was first year I threw a cutter, and first year I threw a four seam fastball, both of which I used against left-handed pitchers. Left-handed hitters. And I found it much easier to add those, having already been comfortable throwing my other pitches for strikes, throwing them where I want to, and being able to execute them. So I think there might be something there. I don't know if that's not necessarily definitive proof that that's the best way to handle it, but yeah, there might be some logic there. I don't know if either of you guys have thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, a bunch of orgs do a bunch of different things. I don't feel super strongly about it in either direction. Just never having played at that level and had to develop new pitches. Heshka, with the addition of those pitches, uh, have you found, like, what is your general attack plan? Let's say just against a lefty now, for example, with the new pitches. What was the motivation to add those, and how do they fit into the attack plan?
So the biggest impetus for adding a new fastball, the four seam, is that the sinker, which I'm really good at executing down and glove side, but for the left-handed bat path, especially with the rising slider playing off of that, both of those pitches basically follow the left-handed bat path. So if they sit fastball low and away timing, even if they guess wrong, um, as they continue to swing, that will basically lead right into the slider pitch speed, if that makes sense. So essentially,
Mhm.
like, they could have one swing timing, and be able to time up both of my pitches. So what I wanted to do was add that four seam. What I really wanted to do was start throwing the fastball up, and I'm like, if I'm going to throw the fastball up, I might as well at least change my grip, even if I'm only getting 4 or 5 extra inches of vertical break. If I'm throwing it up, I might as well do that. And I was able to find a grip that probably got me 8 to 10 more inches of vertical break. So throwing those up in the zone, have found a lot of success against lefties. And then the cutter is a similar idea of the bridge, right? Where it's like, the four seam and the slider, which are both very effective pitches still, have so much horizontal movement differential between them, that the cutter, I think, is a really effective pitch where I can use it to kind of get in and on lefties' hands. It's a little bit harder, but it's not going to. It's going to help my other two pitches basically through this kind of tunneling idea, through this match idea. So against lefties in particular, I found that those two pitches really help set up those other pitches that I talked about. And I think it's like this is a common thing now that I've been seeing, is pitchers throwing two different fastballs. A lot of
Yeah.
them, throw, for example, righty throwing sinkers to righties and four seams to lefties. but both can be used against both different handednesses, right? So like if I'm a righty facing a righty and more traditional over the top righty throwing against a right-handed batter, having that sinker, for example, in and this is kind of what you were talking about, Lambo, with being able to like kind of see the fuller picture, right? Throwing the sinker potentially earlier in hitters' counts, trying to get, especially as a starter who wants to go deep into a game, getting weak contact early in the at bat, and then you can throw the four seam up later in the at bat to try to get a strikeout if you get to 2 strikes. So having different weapons, being able to utilize them in different ways, and especially having 2 fastballs because of the familiarity effect that we talked about. Once a batter sees one of them, it kind of sets his expectation for what a hard pitch is supposed to do. And having a fastball that moves differently really messes with the batter's ability to make contact and get a good swing off.
We touched on the example earlier of a guy who can get a 2-strike whiff but can't get to 2 strikes. Just completely glossed over the fact that our first conversation about your outing, that was you. I mean, your slider grades out as 80 grade. Other models had it very high. And he added this cutter, which our model says isn't very good, but it clearly has a purpose in how you pitch. Like we're not, you can't just be the nerd behind the screen yelling that, it doesn't have the stuff plus to get it done, but it clearly has a place in your arsenal in making you a better pitcher, in getting you more strikeouts, even if it itself is not getting the whiffs on 2 strikes. It is still playing a role in doing that.
And I think the important thing to recognize is it's not just that my cutter helps my fastball and it helps my slider. My slider and my fastball help my cutter as well. So, setting the expectation by throwing a slider, throwing a fastball, now the batter has this expectation of what my arsenal is. And throwing that cutter, might not get a swing and miss, but the batter's timing is going to be so off based on those other 2 pitches that he's seen that in my experience, it gets a lot of weak contact just because it's playing off the expectation the batters have from my other pitches. So it's not just that the cutter helps the other 2. The other 2 also help the cutter.
It's probably worth from here digging into a little bit some of the other work in this space that we think has approached the problem in an interesting way. Jack, you are familiar with the work that Max Resnick has done, that Steve Sutton Brown did over at Baseball Prospectus. Give us a lowdown on what each of them did and where the overlap is with our approach.
Yeah. So Max Resnick, I believe he's a senior at U Chicago, super smart dude. He took the approach of looking at the release angles and seeing how similar a single pitch's release angles are compared to the release angles of every other pitch. So essentially created some sort of entropy calculation like we talked about, just in a different way. From that, what he did was model pitch value. So basically made a pitching plus model, but added this entropy sort of measure in there. Once he had that, he removed those from the model or applied a Sharpe value calculation to them to isolate the value of that entropy in the whole value of a pitch. So got it in terms of run value that way. Super cool stuff. Found that, let's see, the best tunneling boost was the name of his metric. Shota Imanaga, Framber Valdez, Seth Lugo, Luke Weaver. These are on their splitters, changeups, and then Lugo and Valdez on curveball. Super smart way to go about it and great work in the space. And then Stephen Sutton Brown, who we talked to a lot over the weekend at a Sabre seminar, he broke things down into 4 different ways. So looked at the pitch type probability based on the initial trajectory from the batter's point of view. That's the sort of entropy measure that we talked about. The movement spread, velocity spread, basically breaking down mix into 2 different things. And then surprise factor, which is how the observed movement of a pitch was based on the distribution of possible pitch movements in that movement spread. So 2 super interesting, applicable pieces of work here that went about it in slightly different ways, but just exciting to see from our perspective, this starting to get talked about. I mean, Driveline we're not an organization, we're out in the public. So anytime there's public work, it helps everyone. Yeah, we all get better the more people that try this.
And I know something that I alluded to as to the impetus for beginning this research was applications for usage percentages. Marek, I know you have some goodies dropping on this soon. Do you want to kind of go over whatever you feel comfortable with discussing in terms of like how we can eventually use this information to optimize Arsenal usages?
Yeah, it's really just formalizing some of the concepts that we talked about here at different points. Where by starting with the guy's arsenal, by understanding the quality in the standard location and stuff dimensions of those pitches, we have a ranked list of pitch quality that could on its own be used to determine optimal usage. That's based on the idea of throwing your best pitch the most often. From there, if we formalize the decay curves over different time horizons for each of those pitches, i.e., how often can you throw this pitch and still expect it to perform either relative to a baseline or just in absolute terms, how long is it able to achieve a certain run value? We can map out how many pitches, how much usage you can get out of a certain pitch from that perspective. If we layer on additionally these arsenal effects, so we can put a number to the buyback effect, how it combats the decay by saying, with the usage of a bridge cutter, the usage of the sweeper increases by this amount. You throw all of those steps into an optimizer of some kind, and we believe we'll land on a range of usage schemes that maximize a pitcher's game planning in a way that gets a little bit of pure stuff as the driving force for picking pitch types, gets a little bit of the decay effect to act as a cost to throwing the same pitch over and over again. Really captures all of these elements, but as an explicit reward for guys that are able to set up their best pitches with a mix or a match type approach, because ultimately it gets them more usage of their best pitches than it would have before. So our objective here is to not just be descriptive of what makes arsenals good, which is something that we landed on a few months ago and that the broader community has begun to do as well, and turn that into practical in-game run value creation type strategies based off of this information, and we should have more on that quite soon.
We have these really cool visuals, which I don't know if we started posting yet, but it's for example, if you a pitcher throws a pitch and that we overlay our IPV heat map of that pitch and basically where it would have played best, where the pitch ended up, and where it would have played best. And I think where these Arsenal models and Marek's work are going to really, really be cool is eventually, that heat map right now is basically based in isolation from our IPV metrics. So that's all the ball flight metrics, the location, and the count. Additionally, being able to add in Arsenal effects. Additionally, being able to add in, these familiarity effects and saying like, hey, normally the heat map would look like this, but because the pitcher threw this pitch to the batter the pitch before, we know the heat map actually now looks like this. I think that's going to be really, really cool. And I think that's kind of where I see our IPV metric going, where our pitch value metric going, which is just adding in all these additional layers as we start quantifying familiarity, as we're able to quantify arsenals, as we're able to quantify deception, like with some of the work that we've done in the pitching lab here at Driveline. Just being able to add in all these layers, and eventually we're going to have as good of a model as hopefully we can possibly get. Like I said, there's always going to be factors that we won't be able to control. We never will know how good the batter slept the night before, or like what the hitting coach told him in the dugout. But at the very least, we can try to quantify everything we can and hopefully explain away residuals to just explain as much variance as we possibly can. But I'm pretty excited about the future of where we're going with that.
Sweet. Yeah, that was well said. Marek, you got anything to add on future stuff, or are we good to wrap it up? I think that's a good note to end on.
I think that's To be continued as we pump out more of this work and continue the conversation, because as others have said, this is the year of the mix, and so time for us to put up or shut up.